It's really good to be here with you. Really nice to see a full room in Amsterdam. I'm actually surprised because it's the beginning of February and I think we're all a bit boiling in here, so this is not something that I'm used to. Also, I have to say before we get the show started that 2 days ago I was in Tilburg to see a concert and the only thing I could see was the back of people's heads. So I'm glad that they put me up here so that I can actually see your faces this time. Now, just to get things started, before I introduce our panelists here today, of course they don't really need much of an introduction, but I just wanted to give you a little update about the state of Europe, which I'm sure you're very aware of if you've been following the news. We're in a situation right now where we have the head of NATO, Mark Rutte, who you obviously know very well, telling us that Europe needs to have a war mindset. We have, of course, the election of Donald Trump. Elon Musk essentially buying his way into power. We have Belgium, who yesterday finally agreed a government after 7 months without one. We have a situation in Germany where the economic model of Germany is in tatters. There's a lot of censorship. Last year, we organized the Palestine Congress, and that was stopped by the police. They came into the venue, and it literally cut the power to the venue. We have, of course, the ongoing genocide in Gaza. Of course, there's a fragile ceasefire in place right now, but what does that mean? So where the hell is Europe? That's really the question right now. And to answer that question and much more, and of course, before I go on to that, let me just add that yesterday we were in The Hague to launch, together with Jeremy, Brid, and Yanis Varoufakis, to launch the Hague group, which is a group convened by the Progressive International DiEM25 sister organization that was founded by Yanis Varoufakis and the Sanders Institute back in 2018 or 2019, if I'm not mistaken. And that Hague group is a group that comprises member states, not of the European Union, but just states around the world. And it's a group that is fighting to uphold international law and to respect human rights around the world against states which are doing exactly the opposite and not respecting those rights. So, without further ado, let me just introduce the panel very, very quickly. We have Brid Brennan, political educator, activist from Ireland, also from the Transnational Institute. So we are here today. Thank you for being here with us today. We have Jeremy Corbyn, a person who obviously needs no introduction, former leader of the Labour Party, founder of the Peace and Justice Project, long life activist, just a man for whom words, I like words to describe. So, Jeremy Corbyn, everybody. And last but not least, our very own Yanis Varoufakis, DiEM25 co-founder, married 25 years. Right, so without further ado, you have your microphones here, just right next to you. You might need to connect them. Okay, there you go. If I may ask you, Brid, just for a quick reflection about yesterday's proceedings in The Hague, what can you tell us about that? What was your impression and what do you think that the Hague group will achieve?
Okay, good morning. Good morning, people. Good morning. I believe we're going to have a good conversation here today. I think it's wonderful that we have, this morning we had a very heavy frost, and now, by midday we have the sun. And I think this is so symbolic. It's symbolic also where we're at in the world, between winter and spring. And I think we're very much in the moment of spring. Despite that winter is not yet really gone. And I think this describes very well the dynamic of the political balance of forces in the world, but also, in a way, the challenges we face as movements, committed parliamentarians, people who are opening up new territories, I think, for our thinking. So yesterday I think it was very significant. Why do I think that? We had 9 governments who came together with a collective statement And I think the essence of the statement and its importance was the following, that it reiterated the right of the Palestinian people to self-determination and to an independent state as Palestine. And I think this cannot be reiterated and repeated. It has to continue to be at the top of the agenda, I think. So it's significant in a sense that the departure point at this early part of the new year in relation to Palestine was really to give a new impulse to that. And related to it, there were, I think if you look at the inaugural message and statement, there were three very interesting action points, but they really had to do very much with the fact that two areas. One is the whole question of the military and political support. It deals mainly with the military support. That every government has obligations under the UN to actually prevent the transfer of military supplies to upholding the Zionist occupation and destruction of Palestine. I think this is very crucial. And the second one was no harbor for ships that are transferring. And each state has the capacity to do that. And I believe these are elements that kind of open up, and of course, there was also the reiteration that this is not simply for the handful of states that came together in The Hague to follow up on last year. This really is a call to all states. But I do think it's also a call to us as movements. And in a number of ways. We know, and we know especially from the contradictions that sort of are expressed in the multilateral system that was built after the Second World War, that without the people's involvement, not only involvement, engagement, mobilization, this will not happen. There will not be a spring for Palestine, and there will not be a spring for Europe. For Europe we would hope, but also for the world. And I guess that's what our conversation here today is going to be like. I would just like to indicate from the Transnational Institute, we do lots of things in our own way. But maybe just also the Transnational Institute, in a way, was a child born a little bit after Second World War. Actually, we celebrated 50 years this past year. But it came out of an idea, actually, that really then attracted amazing people. And I think this is what really our whole function, Progressive International, dedicated parliamentarians, is about. We have to recover our capacity for the political imaginary. You know, winter can really block out a lot of things, but spring can reopen it. And I really believe we're in that moment. And therefore, when we talk about the Universal Declaration, which has many very important elements, I would put beside it something that came about 10, 15 years after, called the Universal People's Declaration of Rights and Liberation. And this was done in the Charter of Algiers in 1976. And this, in a sense, I think this is what we have to recover also when we are talking about rights. We have to really factor the people's capacity, the people's mobilization, and the people's struggle into this. So I would then maybe wind up by saying, I hope many of us here are anticipating the year that is coming. We're going to have another wonderful opportunity in The Hague in June. The NATO summit is in June in The Hague. So we have to see how we are going to be there. I think this is going to be this could be a major Dutch people's response, but also European people's response to really, in a sense, not only call out the complicity. And I mean, you know, there's now, Mr. Rutte is now Prime Minister of NATO, or Prime Minister of the North Atlantic Organization. But I think that this can be a moment of focus for our next chapter of mobilization. So I'll leave it at that. I'm sure Jeremy and Yanis will have much more to add. No, I'd just like to say, you know, it's so comfortable sitting here with Jeremy. I mean, for those of us who think, you know, unity and finding common agendas is impossible. Well, Jeremy is from Britain, I'm from Ireland, and we do feel very comfortable with each other in a good sense of self-determination.
Thank you so much, Brid. May I ask that, Jeremy, would you like to give your take on yesterday's proceedings and also maybe respond to some of the things that Brid has said?
Can I start?
Yeah, of course, of course. Do as you wish.
Thank you very much, and thanks for inviting me. Good morning, everybody. And, this is a wonderful centre, but I'm feeling very sorry for the people on rows 1, 2, 3, and 4 in the centre block here. Sorry about the sun. I blame Yanis. Why not? And to have this event here is great, and I'm glad I was able to come along. So I'm going back to London later on today, and what I want to do is talk about a few international issues, and then and before that a little bit about the politics of what's happening in my own country, so that you have some understanding of where we're going on this. Yesterday we had the convention to launch the Hague Declaration on Palestine, which was wonderful event, and well done Progressive International, which organised that and put it together. And it's a sign of the times that the primary international for the left is the Progressive International, because it encompasses some governments, some political parties, some trade unions, lots and different localised and community activist groups all around the world, and that is really what international cooperation is about. And Yanis and I were very proud to be part of the foundation of it, and we're both members of the Council of Progressive International. And Brid very kindly said some nice things about us over many years. I first met Brid here in Amsterdam in about 1983 or 4 at a TNI event, and TNI is an organisation I've got a lot of time and a lot of respect for. Its thoughts, its publications, and its work. And you just think of these organisations like TNI around the world and the way that they contribute to our debate. In Britain, as you know, the Labour Party moved itself many degrees to the right in 2020, after I ceased to be the leader of the party. It wasn't solely that, there was a lot of pressures within the party after our period of leadership. And I was suspended from the parliamentary caucus of the Labour Party, and thus my own community in Islington was prevented from choosing any candidate to be the Labour candidate for the subsequent general election. And this standoff lasted for about 2 years. I was an independent member of Parliament during that time, and then just before the 2024 general election, the Labour Party announced they were setting up a selection process for Islington North. So I wrote a very polite letter to the General Secretary. Dear David, you'll remember me. I'm available to be a candidate for Islington North. To whom do I send my biographical details so that the members can vote on the subject? And he wrote back and said, the National Executive has decided that you're not eligible to be considered as a candidate. So I wrote back immediately another very polite letter, another Dear David letter. Dear David, I'm very interested in this decision. Could you tell me how it was taken? And could you tell me how I can appeal against it under the normal rules of natural justice? And he then wrote back a very short letter saying, Dear Jeremy, you must be aware that the Labour Party has removed all consideration of rules of natural justice from its rules and constitution at its annual conference last year. You have no rights to appeal, and you have no rights whatsoever to hold public office ever again on behalf of the Labour Party. And so I then sent him a video 3 days later announcing I was an independent candidate for Islington North. And we had an amazing response of local people as well as from outside, and starting from zero we ran the best possible campaign we could on all of the platforms we put forward in the 2017 and 2019 elections. And particularly because of the rise of intolerance, of racism, of nastiness within our society, we put on my main election leaflet, "Refugees are welcome here." And we won. After the general election of 2019, we founded the Peace and Justice Project, which has around 60,000 subscribers to it. It's a combination of political and social and creative and international activity. We've held 2 international conferences, and we're holding a 3rd conference this September, which will be a combination of international and national. The first day will be on international issues. The second day will be on more UK-focused economic and social justice issues. We're working with independents all over the country. We've formed a very effective alliance of those independents, and this will form into a coherent political voice. I'm not saying there's going to be a new political party tomorrow, because I do think that any political voice and political organisation, as I suspect most of you in this room would agree with me, cannot be just a narcissistic opportunity by a few people in the capital city of any country. It has to be based within the strength of community activity, with community action, with those campaigns on health, on housing, on equality, on justice, opposition to racism, and all of those issues. And so it is, yes, a slightly slower process, but you'll get there in a stronger place because you will have the foundations within communities and within society as a whole, and you'll be listening to a much wider range of people. And so what we're doing in my own community, for example, is that every 6 weeks or so we hold a public open forum, a people's forum, in which I do my report to the community and what I've been doing as their Member of Parliament, and take questions and discussion on that. And then the majority of the meeting is then taken up with whatever issue we have decided we're going to be debating that time. The first one was on housing, where we had tenants representation, those that are suffering from dangerous cladding. We had representatives of homeless people speaking, and homeless people themselves came to the event to speak. The second one was specifically and only on mental health, the causes of the rise of mental health crises, the lack of services for people going through a mental health crisis, but also the societal impacts of stress, low wages, bad housing, stress at work, or stress of unemployment, and stress of poverty, which creates the mental health crisis that affects so much of Western Europe and North America. And the one we held on Thursday evening was on workers' rights and focused on the gig economy, and we leafleted the cafes and the mosques where the delivery riders congregate. And so we had speakers who were themselves delivery riders working in the gig economy on their lack of rights and representation, and how we can work with them on that. And there is a union organised now in Britain, the IWGB, organising particularly Uber and Deliveroo riders, and they're having a day of action on the 14th of February when we're asking all Uber workers, drivers, riders and so on to log off for, I think it's 4 or 6 hours, and the rest of us refuse to take Uber during that period as an act of solidarity with them, where their demands for decent wages and real working conditions, job protection, job security and insurance in their place of work. And so the campaign for union rights for Uber and other workers is actually central to the campaign for social justice in our society. You think of the huge unions that exist in all of our countries, were all founded essentially during industrialisation of the late 18th, 19th and early 20th century. And they have their roots in those huge industrial struggles in the mines, the steelworks and shipyards and so on all across this continent. The struggle for union and workers' rights now is those working in the gig economy, those working in retail, those working in insecure places. We've got to be part of that struggle, and they need to be with us in that struggle. So let's make sure we do organise all of that. And that, of course, leads into often some very difficult areas where documentless people are being grotesquely exploited in the gig economy. We've got to be in solidarity with them. There is no future for a union that ignores the status of somebody, or rather says it will not take people into membership because they're not documented workers. We need to get them documented and get them recognised to be part of our society. Now, the other things we're doing in the PJP is I do not believe that socialism, social justice and struggle is just about theories and ideas and action. Of course it is all of those things, but it's also about the creativity of the way which we approach our lives and approach this world. And so our project has produced 2 books over the past year, one called Poetry for the Many, which is a collection of poetry selected by Len McCluskey, the former General Secretary of Unite the Union, myself and a few others, and many other people, including Michael Rosen and others have put forward poems in this book. We selected it, we published it. I was astonished at how well it sold. It's now in its 3rd edition, and we've been doing poetry events all over the country. An amazing combination of people turn up at poetry events because they want to talk about ideas and inspiration and where they come from. And I always say to young people, if you do write poetry, don't be ashamed of it, be proud of it, and please read it out to the rest of us, because poets often tell the truths that others will not. And so it's been, to me, even to me, an eye-opener of the creativity of so many people all around as we're doing this. And I'm doing another book next year called Poetry from the Many, which is going to be a publication of all the hundreds of poems I've been sent ever since we produced this book. So it's a way of encouraging creativity. We also have Music for the Many, where we do regular music concerts in support of independent musicians, independent music venues, and we've got one at the 100 Club tomorrow night in Oxford Street in London. The other book we produced is called Mag, The Monstrous Anger of the Guns, and that comes from the First World War poem by Wilfred Owen, who the words are, "What music was there for those men that die like cattle? Only the monstrous anger of the guns," as they were mown down on the Western Front. And our book is an analysis of the global arms trade, the 24 trillion a year that's spent on the global arms trade, and what that could be used for, and how we need to be serious campaigners for peace and for justice, and a reduction in arms expenditure, and a conversion of those industries into something that is socially useful. Think of how much even 10% of the 24 trillion on arms could achieve in environmental sustainability, healthcare and education all around the world. And so our book, again, is now in its 2nd edition, and we're doing a lot of events on that. And some of the conversations are quite complicated. Going to a town where there is a lot of people working in the arms industry, they want a job. They're not our enemies. They need a job. They need their skills to be used for something else. And that's what we're putting forward in this book, and it's I'm very proud of the work we've achieved on that. So all these things are bringing a lot of people together. The principle being, we bring people together on causes, on justice, and build a movement from that, and that movement is growing very, very fast. I'm going to get told off for going much longer, so I'll be very brief on the last things I want to say. Is that all right? Yes. Yesterday was to me, a historic day. The Hague Declaration was amazing, and the fact that 9 countries were there yesterday supporting it and publicly declaring for it, and I'm very confident that quite a few other countries are going to join in very soon. Governments are going to join in, as well as popular movements, and it is essentially building on the work of those of international solidarity with the people of Palestine. But it has taken 47,000 recorded deaths in Gaza to get to this position. Goodness knows how many more bodies are going to be discovered in Gaza as the rubble begins to be cleared. And also the numbers of people that are now dying in the West Bank. And the occupation of the West Bank is intensifying, and there are strong moves in Israel to annex the whole of the West Bank. And Trump's suggestion of depopulating the entirety of Gaza is as appalling as it is disgusting. And so our solidarity with the people of Palestine is absolutely unwavering. Many awful things have been thrown at and said against all of us who support Palestine. The Palestine Solidarity Movement in Britain and Stop the War Coalition and others have organised now 24 national marches since October 23 and many more before that. And the biggest one had almost 1 million people on it. And so it is a huge movement. They've been called the most appalling things. Our marches are a march of hope, a march of peace, a march of love. The biggest block on it is actually the Jewish block of people in solidarity with the people of Palestine. So please, let's not hear these disgusting attacks on us. We are people of unity and of peace, and of all religions and none, all backgrounds and very different people from all around the world. We are an anti-racist movement as well as a movement in solidarity with the people of Palestine. And it's important to keep that there and to keep that solidarity going and recognise there are also some wonderful people in Israel who are campaigning to end the occupation. Our great friend Varoufakis, who's a member of the Knesset, has himself been suspended now, hasn't he, from the Knesset, and he's been suspended because he supports Palestine and the Palestinian people. And that's an example of what the bravery of those people are. So we've got many more marches and demonstrations to come until we get to that day when Palestine can be at peace and under recognition. But you know what? Just imagine you're a young child in Gaza and you've seen your home destroyed, your mum, your dad, your brothers, your sisters, your aunties, your uncle, your cousins, all of your family, all of your community destroyed. And you're the only one who survives. The rest of your life you're going to have, just as people coming out of the concentration camps had in 1945, a survivor's guilt. The mental health scars of this bombardment of Gaza will be intergenerational for a very, very long time to come. And so our support has to be there for a very long time, for the long haul, with the people of Palestine. And I say to those governments that have knowingly supplied bombs, guided missiles, laser weapons, drones, and all the other things to Israel to target their bombing of Gaza, you know what you've been doing. You know that you've been directing missiles to destroy schools and hospitals and homes. You know what you've been doing. And if the International Court of Justice and the ICC say it's an act of genocide, then I believe it is. And if they say that people have committed war crimes, and I believe they have, then those that supply the weapons are also guilty of those crimes as well. There's so much more internationally. I want to say this, but just quickly. The war in Russia and Ukraine is abominable and appalling. Conscripted soldiers from Russia are killing conscripted soldiers from Ukraine. It's almost like First World War mentality fighting that's going on. There has to be a ceasefire. There has to be an end to that war. It is not a solution to simply pour weapons in on either side into the conflict. There has to be a pathway to peace somehow. Or are we to go and see this as being the driving force of a new generation of a European arms industry to feed weapons into Ukraine, just as much as there'll be a new generation of weapons industries in Russia, China and India and other places to feed it the other way around. We have to be that voice that's prepared to step up bravely and say there has to be a halt to this, there has to be a ceasefire, there has to be a way forward so that the people of Russia and Ukraine can live in peace. I don't condone what Putin did. I don't condone that at all. That's not my point. My point is the people of the area deserve to be able to live in peace, and we have to be that voice for their peace as well, and we need to keep saying that. Our media reporting of conflicts is very selective. Barely any reporting of the conflict in Sudan or the role of the UAE in it or the pouring of arms into Sudan, and almost no reporting of what's happening in the Democratic Republic of Congo, where the mineral companies' interests in removing coltan and cobalt from Congo in advance of every other thought they've got. The occupation of Goma and the east of Congo is going to lead to some most horrific conflict, and it is very important that we show some solidarity with the people of the Congo who've been so grotesquely exploited, now being occupied, all because they have the temerity to live above very valuable minerals in the ground, not one bit of which they've ever benefited from in any way. And so let's have some solidarity with the people of the Congo and not pour arms into there, but pour into our support and our solidarity for their ability to live in peace. The last thing I'd say is this: we're in a moment of time in Europe when the rise of the far right is frightening and obvious. Far right here in the Netherlands, France, Germany, Austria, Britain, Italy, Hungary, you know the places as well as I do. And you know the way in which the racists behave. Every economic problem is blamed on migrants, every economic problem is blamed on immigrants, and in the case of Britain, you'd have thought that every problem of social funding of schools, of hospitals, of housing and everything is somehow or other the responsibility of desperate people getting into an unsafe boat trying to cross the channel from Calais. It's nonsense, and they know it's nonsense, but it works. This sort of cheap racist stuff works, and we go to every community and say, well, if there weren't all these refugees, we'd have all the housing we need. It's absolutely nonsense. The reason there's a housing shortage, the reason there's underfunding in education, the reason there's underfunding in the health service is inequality and wealth within our society, in which a taxation system drives resources towards the wealth and takes it away from the mass of the population. So the left needs to confront the racists, yes, with an anti-racist message, but also with a message of social justice, equality, and investment in the environment and other services that we need. That has to be the way forward to defeat the racists. Brid said, this is the start of spring. It's a very early spring, I have to say, Brid, but that's fine by me. That's okay. We need that voice all across Europe, indeed all across the world, in opposition to racism, and to give people hope and an expectation. The next generation will live better than this generation does. At the moment, we're going into intergenerational poverty and depression. We need to have that sense of hope. You only get that sense of hope from the unity of popular movements bringing about peace, social justice, and environmental sustainability in our world. People have been through troughs many times in history, but they've got out of those troughs and brought us some fantastic achievements and changes. We're getting out of that trough now. Let's unite against racism. Let's unite for social justice. Let's unite for peace. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Passing the microphone to Yanis. Just before I give the word to Yanis, just a brief comment. If you want to know more about the Peace and Justice project, go to thecorbynproject.com. You can find all the information you want there. And a personal note of thanks to Jeremy, because I lived in the UK for 11 years, in just pre-Brexit times, from 2004 to 2015. And the only time that I felt that the Labour Party was really doing something right was when Jeremy was its leader. So just a big round of applause for all the work that Jeremy has done over the years and how he inspired a generation of young people to stand for the things that we were talking about here today. And now I'll pass over the word to Yanis. Yanis, who last year was banned from entering Germany for calling a genocide a genocide. And who's also the leader of our pan-European movement, DiEM25, and our Greek party, NATO25. Yanis.
This morning, just before leaving the hotel to get here, somebody on X, Twitter, took a swipe at me for being fixated with Palestine. It was in response to a post celebrating yesterday's inauguration of the Hague Group. And it seemed that it was a left-wing criticism, that I was fixating, we are fixating with Palestine, and there was a long list of other conflicts and tragedies that I was not paying attention to. We are not paying attention to, like Goma in the Congo, in the Sudan, the killing fields of Ukraine, what's happening in Myanmar, and so on. And I thought about it for a second. And I realized that I'm proud of being fixated with Palestine. Because if this was 1936, we all would have a moral obligation, an ethical duty to be fixated with the Nazis and their persecution of the Jewish people. If this were the 1960s and 70s, we would have a duty to be fixated with apartheid in South Africa. If this was 1981, we would have an obligation to be fixated over the hunger strikes in the Maze prison in Northern Ireland. To be fixated in 1936 about the plight of the Jewish people was not to ignore all the other massacres of the British Empire, for instance, in India, in Kenya. No, you fixate on the issue at hand in order to develop, firstly, your own understanding of what it means to fight against injustice, and then to take this fixation and turn it into a global fight for peace, justice, and progress. This is what we're doing. In particular, it is essential that this fixation with Palestine is blended with a capacity to recognize the interconnections between our different predicaments. Jeremy and Brid talked about them, the arms trade, the war in the Ukraine. It is astonishing that there is a war happening in Europe, and Europe is cheerleading a United States whose only purpose, let's see what Trump is going to do, but so far the revealed preference of the United States is for a never-ending war. A war that never ends. This is what they want. Like Netanyahu. Netanyahu doesn't want a ceasefire, he doesn't want peace, because his personal interests lie in a never-ending war. And it's astonishing to have a Europe, which was supposedly a peace project. The whole point of the European Union, it was celebrated as a way to end wars forever in Europe. And you have a European Union. So, a European Union which betrays its own propaganda as to its raison d'etre by having this half-crazy person, Kaja Kallas, being our foreign and defense representative, the former Prime Minister of Estonia, who 3 weeks before she became the European Union's responsible person for, Chief of Defense and Foreign Affairs, advocated in a televised interview the need to break Russia up. Now, this is madness, this is paranoia. Anybody who believes that should be locked up, not be made responsible for Europe's defense and foreign affairs. Now, why did we get there? Why are we, not we, you and me, but our governments, so complicit, not only sending 2,000-pound bombs to Israel, which is what Germany does, but also utterly and constantly supporting the Zionist narrative that the people of Gaza don't have the right to resist, and the equation of the duty to resist with anti-Semitism. How did we get there? We were not always there. I mean, I remember a very right-wing, corrupt, but rather unpalatable president of France. Remember Jacques Chirac? Once he went to the occupied territories, and he actually had a physical confrontation with the Israeli soldiers, and he called them names, and he called them occupying force. Now, can you imagine Emmanuel Macron doing this today? No way. Even if he believes it, he won't do it, because he is going to be utterly destroyed by Le Monde, by Nouvel Observateur, by the media. So what happened to a Europe? Unless we are fixated with Palestine, we cannot understand it. And let me explain that point. Before I salute you for being here, And before I thank our local group of DiEM25 for putting up this remarkable meeting today. Thank you very much in advance. Now look, you can see from the moment that Donald Trump gets elected, a man who loathes the European Union, who has put forward a very cogent and logical, I don't say correct, I say logical, rationally structured, not rational, case against the existence of the European Union. Somebody who calls the European Union a leech on American business and who is going definitely to impose tariffs on German, Dutch exports to the United States. So this man, who is the actual nightmare of the liberal establishment in Holland, in France, in Germany, gets elected. And what do the European leaders do? They compete against one another as to who is going to be the first to leak his boots. So you have a Europe which is completely and utterly dependent. It is a vassal continent of the United States. Now, we are beginning now to understand why you have a situation, think about it. The United States, together with Ukraine and maybe Poland, blew up Nord Stream 1, which is an investment of the Federal Republic of Germany in its fuel resources. Now, I'm not saying it was right to invest in that or wrong to invest in that, but what I'm saying is that, they blew it up. This was a terrorist attack on a German asset of massive value to German industry. I'm not talking about the working class, harsh leftists, to them, to the capitalists, to Germany. And what do? They look the other way. And they allow the rumors to spread that it was Putin who blew up his own means of supplying Germany with his own natural gas, which makes no sense. And yet you have the BBC, Deutsche Welle, and so on going along with it. Now, why all this magnitude of total dependence on whatever it is that Washington, D.C. has decided? Well, allow me, because I have a relationship with certain people of a Dutch extraction, like Jeroen Dijsselbloem, for instance. I have this prior experience of watching them destroy Europe. Because what they did to us here in Greece was not just north-south. It was not just, the busy bees, the mighty, highly productive ants of Germany and of Holland, of the north, having a little tussle against the grasshoppers of the south who laze in the sun and don't work. This was all bullshit. What it was a cynical attempt, after the northern European banks went belly up, to bail them out and to charge the bill to the peoples of Europe, beginning with the ones in the south, because they were the most bankrupt, and then bringing the austerity to the north. This is what they did. We were the guinea pig, the laboratory of austerity. They practiced on that, then they came to you immediately after us, because we are the blacks of Europe, as I was told by an Irishman when I was a student and a member of Troops Out in England. So they took it to Ireland, then they took it to his country, Portugal. He comes from Portugal. Then from Portugal, they took it to Spain, Italy, France, and then to Germany, and to you folks. Okay, the reason why your social services are diminishing and so on is that it is this process of austerity for the many and largesse, socialism in inverted commas, for the very few. They printed 6 trillion euros to give to the bankers. The bankers gave it to the big business. The big business did not invest it. Why did they not invest it? Because they looked at all of us around you and they said, these people don't have money. So as if we are going to invest in products that these people can't afford. So what did they do with these 6 trillion euros? BAS, Volkswagen, Alstom, and so on. You know what they did? They went to the stock exchange and bought their own shares. Their shares went up, they didn't invest anything. And you know what? Guess what? Europe, for 15 years, has not invested in anything. Zero net investment in Europe. This has never happened in the history of the universe, not the world. To have such a rich continent, with all these savings and money, and profits, and real estate, not investing. But the Chinese and the Americans invested in greener technologies, in what I call cloud capital, algorithms, AI, and all that. And you know what? We've become the stupid continent. We missed out on one whole technological revolution. So, you know, we are now, and we've already entered, after all these 15 years, a steady process of secular stagnation. This is not a crisis that will go down and then will go up. For the next 50 years, we're condemned to stagnate as a continent. When a continent like Europe, which is so powerful and so rich, stagnates, what happens is the politics starts fragmenting. This is why Emmanuel Macron doesn't even have the guts of Jacques Chirac, or why Olaf Scholz cannot even be like, you know, Schroeder, who said no to the invasion of Iraq. A despicable, poor excuse for human nature, Schroeder was, but at least he said no to the invasion of Iraq, along with, who was it, Sarkozy? No, Chirac. Yeah, Chirac. Against, no, Sarkozy was, no. Anyway, sorry, big mistake. So the point I'm making is that the reason why we are so complacent, the reason why the far right is rising everywhere, universally, why is the far right rising up? For exactly the same reason why it was rising up in the mid-war period. We had 1929, just like in 2008, Wall Street collapsed. The banks of Europe immediately collapsed. After 1929, after 2008. Then after that, what happened? Governments started pushing the losses of the bankers onto the shoulders of the weakest of citizens. After 1930, 31, after 2009, 2010. Exactly the same. It was as if they were trying to replicate the mid-war period. And then you had an investment strike. Industrialists were not investing. I explained that. This is exactly what happened in the 1930s. Discontent grew. The left-wing parties, the center-left parties, overthrew people like Jeremy, people like me. I remember Ramsay MacDonald in the kind of thing that was happening. The left, the center-left, was purging itself, trying to adapt to the center, which was really the center which was shifting increasingly to the right, being pushed by those who genuinely looked at people in the eye and said, I feel your pain. I feel your pain. You've never had it so bad. Your children are going to have a far worse life than you did. I feel your pain. Give me the power and I'll make you great again. And those were the fascists back then, and they're the fascists today. In this context, a Europe that is politically fragmented, it is becoming a vassal of the powers that be, in this case, Washington, D.C., cannot do anything to oppose the never-ending war in Ukraine, cannot do anything to oppose its own secular stagnation, and when Netanyahu, along with Genocide Joe Biden, place a whole people, the people of Gaza, on death row, because this is what they did. They placed a whole people on death row. The Europeans, they look like a dog that doesn't understand what it is that you're saying to it. You do this. You have, Ursula von der Leyen. She projects the flag of Israel on the buildings, and at the same time, she has to, in the context of explaining why Europe is utterly committed to international law, she has to explain why she's not going to abide by the International Criminal Court's decision to indict Netanyahu. So they are in total disarray. Their utter stupidity, their half-crazed madness would have been something to write scripts, theater plays about, and to enjoy if it wasn't so tragic for Europe and for the rest of the world. So here is my conclusion, and it is this. After a year and a half of these massacres that I think Jeremy described so aptly through the eyes of a child that has survived the bombing and will be living under this cloud of survival kit forever. Under that awful and dark light, we have a situation where the people of Europe have decoupled from their leadership. The mood, even here in Holland, even in Germany, has shifted. People no longer buy the lie that Israel is defending itself. But our government, look at you, take the case of the Netherlands. The mood has shifted in the people. In your parliament, there is hardly anyone who talks about genocide. Hardly anyone. So what happens when you have this huge disconnect between the people and the elected politicians? The answer is things like today. Events like this is why DiEM25 is calling upon you to join us. This is why the Progressive International is calling upon people around the world to join us. As my great friends and comrades have said, this is a time for unity and for solidarity, for the sake of Europe, for the sake of rationality, of logic, and, you know, also for having some fun, because nothing is fun in this life unless we're all together to fight for what is just. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Indeed, resistance is never futile. I'm being told that Jeremy has to leave us, unfortunately. So I would like you to just, give a grand applause to Jeremy, Corbyn, and thank you so much. Thank you. I just wanted to, Yanis reminded me of something earlier when he was talking about austerity, because in actual fact, the microphone is working again, great. It reminded me of this old adage that the bankers are the best communists because they love sharing wealth amongst themselves, and also the fact, and I remember in 2008, 2009, and then 2016 when I joined DiEM, I had a lot of friends and people in Portugal going, why aren't you working for a political party or movement in Portugal? Why are you doing something at transnational pan-European level? Why are you with Yanis Varoufakis and not with, Davide or whoever else? And I was thinking, well, where the hell were you guys in 2015, 2016 when Syriza with Yanis as Greek finance minister was trying to negotiate a good deal for the country, the only deal that could actually work. Where were you, actually? And they were nowhere to be seen. So when Yanis resigned and all these other parties all across Europe, left parties supposedly, decided to stay aligned with Syriza for political reasons, that's my answer to them, is like, well, go to hell, really. So that's why I'm with DiEM. Let's move on to some questions from the audience. I know there's a microphone being moved around. I think Miko over there has it. Okay, first come, first serve. Let's try and keep it balanced between men and women. Let's go over there first to that gentleman at the back. It's just there over on the right. Thank you, Miko.
Hi. I like your vision about talking against austerity. I just wonder, how can we also present a vision of pragmatic optimism? Where should the investment go? And particularly, I want to talk about a rising trend, Argentina, the US now, of talking about government efficiency. It sounds like someone going after government, but I think there is room for simplification in government, because it should not be a right idea that governments should be efficient. The taxpayer money should be used wisely. So why do we let the right take over what should be left-wing ideas? How can we also take over the narrative that I think appears to be getting stolen by the right, and instead of arguing against racists, but rather take over the narratives? We talk about government efficiency, we talk about positive investment in what? Where is our vision, and what do you suggest Europe should look to concretely?
Thank you. Shall we take another question and then we'll put it? Yeah. I think there's a lady over here. Can we go over there? And then we'll have more chance for more questions afterwards, and I'm sure Yanis will be happy to talk to you as well, and Brid after we're done here.
Look, what happened to the left wings, to the progressive in Europe? Don't you see something that has to do with the cooptation of all politicians, left-wing politicians, progressive politicians, by the Davos group, by this group of who wants to reset the world, the great reset. Is there a connection with that?
Thank you. Okay, let's start with these two. If we have time for another couple after, we will do that. Who would like to? Brid, yeah, Brid. Yeah, let's start with the Brid, indeed.
These are very provocative questions in a way, but very essential. Maybe to deal with your question about like where to go from here, I think it's so important. The narrative is so important. I think one of the important things I would emphasize is we have to dismantle the narrative of the right. I mean, we have to interrogate it and dismantle it. I mean, for example, of course, as Yanis emphasized at the beginning, the fixation on what's happening in Palestine and the war around that. But actually the war that the right is waging is not just the physical armaments war, it's the war also on people. It's the dispensable people of the South, whether we're talking Sudan, we're talking DRC, but it's also the dispensable people of the North and the absolutely marginalized people that are in zero jobs, zero contract jobs, be grateful for austerity, and the war on our public services. So I think we have to actually dismantle that narrative of the right. We also have to dismantle the myth of Europe as the as the frontliner on peace and democracy. Of course, we should never underestimate the struggle of the left in the war, in the Second World War. There was that great attempt, in a way, to create a new era for humanity. However, it got completely hijacked. I mean, what we're learning, I think, in our engagement with Palestine is that the Palestinian occupied settler colony was actually an invention of the US and Britain, and to make sure Palestine would never be a self-contained and sovereign state. I think what we have found in Europe after the Second World War was a kind of false consensus, in a way. And I think all the shifts we have seen of the left since World War II is exactly that we've gone away from the conditions that are necessary to deliver on the issue of peace, on the issue of justice, on the issue of equality. So I think one of our major challenges is how we reinvent the narrative, but also how we call out where the narrative has been, not the narrative, but the reality has really been conceded. It has been conceded to the right. So I think we're in a very challenging moment, but we're also in a very opportune moment. If we don't do it now, when will we do it? And this is going to take all of us revisiting our politics, revisiting our alliance work, revisiting the Europe that we want, because of course the Europe that we have is our friends from, I remember one of our great friends from Africa in TNI, Dot Keith. I mean, Dot would say, do any of you in Europe, and she meant the left, do any of you in Europe understand how parasitical Europe is, how parasitical our economy, how false it was. It was built really not just on the labor of European workers, but it was built on the resources of the global South. And I think this is something we really have to, in a way, bring all our imaginations to. I believe the era we are entering is the era of political imaginary. And without that, we will not be able to call out the Mafrau genocides or the Menair genocides. We really have to reinvent that. And I think the fact that we have a full room here this morning, on a Saturday morning, it means, we are all part of revisiting that political imaginary. And there is no roadmap. Maybe that's one of the major casualties of our political thinking. Neoliberalism is collapsing. But however, it has also, as you were emphasizing the question of efficiency, but actually we are being pushed back from taking a leap of an ambitious vision for the future. And that's where your point comes in very well. we have lost the discourse in a way of the left, which is to be imaginative, but also to work hard to organize it.
I sympathize with your concern that the right should not steal the thunder of the efficiency narrative, but at the same time, if you look at the last 40 years since Thatcherism and Reaganism and so on, efficiency has never suffered more than by those who claim to serve it. Thatcher was all about whittling down the state, what Elon Musk has been tasked to do now. The narrative was we cut, and at the same time, if you ask them, all right, so who's going to do the work, transfer all the state bureaucratic machinations, work to the private sector, which by definition, by assumption, is more efficient because of competition. Bullshit. Just, sorry, I can't find a more scientific term to describe it. The result of Thatcherism is that Britain has not built one reservoir in the last 38 years. They cannot build a fast train from London to Manchester, and they spent tens of billions, and now they had to cut it down to go from London to Birmingham. Why is that? Because these large-scale projects require, especially if they're going to be funded by the taxpayers, which is the only way they can be made, because the private sector, look, Elon Musk may be going now to the moon and to Mars and so on, but he would never have put forward, no private company would ever have done the hard work that NASA did for many, many years to go to the moon, right? So, by essentially creating an atrophy in the bureaucracy of the great liberal democratic states, they have stopped them from being able to do anything. The United States, there is no way, let's say that Trump, wants to build a super fast train from New York to LA. Let's be less ambitious. From New York to Washington. He can't do it, because there is no company in the United States that is capable of doing it. They want to build nuclear submarines, and they can't. They have all the money, they have economized, they have borrowed, and they put all the money there, but their shipyards cannot produce it. Why? Because they have lost the capacity. This efficiency narrative has depleted their capacity to produce anything. Compare and contrast with China, where there's a vast bureaucracy, and yet they can make things happen profitably, right? And efficiently. So let's not grant them that. Of course, we need, as leftists, to attack not so much inefficiency, but corruption. This is what state bureaucracies are replete with, and this is what and their corruption is always the kind of activity that these libertarians never touch on, because they love it. So when, for instance, I mentioned before in my previous chat with you, when they printed 3 trillion euros in order to boost the European economy, how efficiently was that utilized? They gave it to the bankers, who gave it to their friends in big business to buy shares, to increase the share price, so that their bonuses would go through the roof, because the bonuses of the directors are linked to the share price. Now, if this is not a mind-boggling level of inefficiency, I would call it just straightforward corruption. I don't know what is. Now, you mentioned the Great Reset. Forget it. It's insignificant. It's just entirely with no substance. The point you started making was a good one, about the left, the center-left politicians being co-opted by big business. That is utterly correct. They don't need Davos, and they don't need the Great Reset. The Great Reset is just a little project to keep some people busy and being talked about. There's no conspiracy here. Or to put it differently, there is a conspiracy without conspirators. It's called capitalism. I call it techno-feudalism. But let me give you an example from my personal experience. As you may know, you do know, for about 5.5 months I was the Minister of Finance. And my task was to clash with the neoliberal libertarian, supposedly, and they were not new, they were not liberal, they didn't believe in freedom. They simply wanted to push austerity down our throats and to appropriate as much wealth for their mates or for their bosses, to be more precise. In my team, I had some very smart, young men and women who had grown up through meetings like this, through the movements. They were part of the coalition of the radical left of Greece, our party, Syriza back then. They had good education, master's degrees and PhDs. They had a good Marxist upbringing in terms of their theory. And I remember, I'll mention one of them, not by name. Let's call him Costa. His name is not Costa, but let's call him Costa. He was the person who was, in my team, the most radical. And my greatest moral supporter in those meetings, when I would come out and my heart had sunk by what I had heard, he would be lifting my spirits and, no pasaran, and, as long as the people are behind us. One of the things we were working on with him was the electricity, power generation and distribution network. The Troika wanted, what happened in the end after my resignation, that our publicly owned electricity grid, production and distribution, to be cut down and cut up in different pieces to be given to oligarchs. Okay? We gave this fight, we lost, I went home. And for a while I have to say that I was so depressed that we started DiEM25 and so on, but I lost touch with many of the comrades from Syriza because Syriza stayed in government and did all that. Six months ago, I was walking my dog outside the house, and there comes a sparkling 600 EDFC Mercedes-Benz that took about 3 acres to park in the middle of congested Athens. And then comes out this young man, this young Costa. I hardly recognized him. His Armani suit was sparkling in the dark. His beard had gone. He looked suave, okay? And he was actually nice to me. He said I looked like something the cat dragged in, not my dog, because I was taking the dog for a walk. I was dirty, and it was midnight. And he said, "Yanis." I said, "Costa." And he nearly hugged me, but didn't. And he said, "Oh, I've been following you. As always, I'm always very impressed by what you're doing." And I said, "Costa, what are you doing these days?" He said, "I'm the CEO of one of these private companies that inherited a chunk of our public electricity grid." And I didn't say anything to him because he knew enough to know what a bastard he was. So I didn't need to tell him anything. I just smiled. I said, "Well, good luck with what you're doing." He said, "Yanis, look, I'm still learning a lot from you," he said. "But Yanis, are you still insisting on this left-wing thing?" I said, "Some of us are too old to change our spots." And I walked away into the dark. So it's not the Gates, he said, it's not Bill Gates, it's capital.
So honored to be part of such an amazing event today. We pulled it off in literally 2.5 days, and I'm so excited to see you all here. So well done for responding so quickly. And that's what we require in order to shift power. We require a swift and quick response. Always. You need to move as soon as you understand that things are being pulled out of your hands. You need to fight back, and you need to do it quickly. We need to move out of the lull that we are under. It's almost like we're under the spell of capital, but we need to move out of that. And so I was very inspired when Jeremy spoke about the poets earlier on, and I just penned something really quickly. I'm going to read it out to you. They will never destroy the brilliance of our resilience, the fire in our desire, the voice in our choice, the persistence in our resistance. They can shove us, push us, shame us, and come after us, but they will never silence us. Whilst we organize for power, we must organize for peace. And that's where I believe we need to move and move swiftly. And from the Dutch perspective, I think that we have been too fragmented for far too long, and it's time to join together, like I said last week in Museumplein, unite in the fight. That's what we need to do. It doesn't matter your politics, it doesn't matter how far left you lean, but if you are someone that cares, you gotta get out of where you are, your comfort zone, and get involved in whichever way you want. But later on, we're going to talk about how you can do that from the Dutch perspective. And over to Davide. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lucille. Indeed, we'll talk about the Dutch perspective, but let's begin with the pan-European internationalist one, and then boil it down to what we can do actually here in the Netherlands. But maybe the Irish perspective next, from Brid. What lessons can you give or pass on, or what lessons have we learned from the experience of Ireland that can be adapted also to Europe and to what we're doing here today, also in the Netherlands?
Yeah, I don't know whether that's a Pandora's box or at least a chip in the light forward, Well, I think one of the major one of the major perhaps lessons or reflections really on the Irish experience is the following, and it links very well with what Yanis was saying earlier today. We've had this amazing relationship with Europe. I mean, if you're looking close enough in many of the cities of Europe, you'll find remnants of an earlier Irish missionary effort from Europe in the 6th century. No, we've always, well, first of all, we came, I think, from the Middle East. We claim as Celtic people to come from the Mesopotamia. I guess the Mesopotamia has many children, many tribes. Well, the Celts claim that's one of our tributaries. That's a place we came from. We were pushed by the Romans across Europe. And then in the 6th century, we revisited Europe. And then fast forward to the more recent century. In the meantime, we developed these incredibly sort of encountered this imperialistic design of Britain in relation to Ireland, which we still have. I mean, Northern Ireland is still occupied, in case you didn't know. And in the meantime, I think we've many important lessons from our own revolution, because there was naturally in many contexts of a national struggle, the national part is very well articulated. In the Irish case, we also had a socialist part. As a matter of fact, we claim the first Red Army in Europe was in Dublin, not in Petersburg. In 1913, the workers of Dublin organized what we call the Citizens' Army. And these two strands have run through our history until now. And in a way, I think the very positive thing about Ireland today and about the popular struggle there is that we are trying to reclaim these two strands in the question of self-determination, but the question of another Ireland, not one that's in hog to the European Union, whether we are talking about the common agricultural policy, whether we are talking about being the jump-off point for American corporations to Europe, or whether we are talking about, which is going to be our major battle, the question of NATO. Ireland with Austria is one of the few countries that's not in NATO, and we have resisted that ever since NATO was established and before. In our own revolution in the beginning of the 1900s was born from the anti-conscription movement against the First World War. We are now at a situation, and this you will hear more about this from Irish activists. We have what we call we have rejected all the, despite we being big fans of Europe and Europe's people, we have rejected all the major consolidation treaties of the European Union, including Lisbon, which was a very, very big fight. And many of those fights have really zeroed in on the military question, well, in a way, the question of capitalism in Europe, imperialism remanifesting in Europe, but also military manifestation. And we have a triple lock, which was a kind of concession in the period of the Lisbon Treaty, that because we voted no, and then we were deluged, of course, with money and everything else from the European Union, and sort of, being regarded as very, very backward members of the European Union, like the Greeks, no? Or the Portuguese, or the Spaniards. But in the kind of concession that was made and built was what we call the triple lock, that this keeps us out of NATO, basically. And right now, our current coalition are on a slippery slope. They're under tremendous pressure, no doubt, from Washington, but also from Europe. I mean, the dream of Europe is all of the European Union inside NATO. And we believe this is going to be a very pitched battle. Maybe I will come back to that maybe when we pick up other strands of battles we have to fight here in Europe. But we will certainly need the support of the rethinking people of Europe to win this battle and refuse to be in NATO. The other country, by the way, that's not in NATO is Austria. Why? That was negotiated by the Soviet Union with the victors of Second World War to allow that they would withdraw from Austria if Austria will remain neutral. Yeah, a very, very important point that, of course, we very conveniently forget in the big narrative of today. Yeah.
Thank you, Brid. Thank you, Brid. I just have a little story about NATO that I'd like to share with you all, because I actually visited NATO, the SHAPE headquarters in Belgium when I was a student, 12, 13 years ago or something like that. And I went there, and I'm sure they were thinking, oh, here's a young group of people, they're going to be indoctrinated, it's our chance to really get them, So we go there, and I'm in a seminar in a room, and they're telling us all about, NATO, how NATO cares about human rights, democracy, and all the rest. And I kind of put my hand up, like, really, let me speak. And they gave me the word, and I just asked them, like, what, everything you've said, okay, I've listened to it. But why was Portugal a founding member of NATO when Portugal was a military dictatorship at the time? And they couldn't answer me that question, So they were like, oh, well, we'll talk to you afterwards, right? So that's where it ended. On that note, Yanis.
Well, thank you. 1, 2, yes, we're back. It is not just a question of keeping Ireland out of NATO. This is an important task. It is bigger than that. The question ought to be, how do we get Europe out of NATO? The whole of Europe out of NATO. And the reason I say that is because, there are many reasons. One is that I grew up in a fascist dictatorship that was a member of NATO. So when Finnish and Polish and Estonian comrades say to me, but Yanis, NATO is a liberation movement, I say, no, it wasn't when I was growing up. Beyond that, the standard narrative is that NATO is a protective shield which keeps us safe from the Russians, the Chinese, extraterrestrials. This is the idea. The idea is that there are enemies out there intent on taking us over, and NATO is a shield defending us. But this is one narrative. But the narrative that I espouse is exactly the opposite. That NATO is like the mafia. The mafia sows insecurity in you, busts your shop down, up, in the middle of the night, and then comes and seeks sells you protection. So this is, allow me to make the point about, regarding Ukraine. There's no doubt that Putin, I have personally demonstrated with Jeremy, outside the Russian embassy, you know when? You don't know, 2001, over the massacres of Chechens by Putin, who killed 250,000 people, so as to consolidate his presidency, his regime in Moscow. Back then, he was the blue-eyed boy of NATO. They loved him. So much so that he proposed, that Russia joins NATO. And we were being beaten up by policemen, coppers in London for demonstrating outside the Russian embassy. So I stood up in the Senate of the University of Athens, where I'm a professor and I was back then, when the Greek right-wing government of the time was pushing down our throats as professors their demand that we give Putin an honorary doctorate. I stood up, and I was in a minority of one again, saying no because he's a war criminal. So, just for the record, right? But who created Putin? The Americans. It is very clear. Think 1991. The Soviet Union has collapsed. The Russian economy is gone, right? On the floor, face down. You have that idiot Chubais, the prime minister, under Yeltsin, essentially a Thatcherite, wanting to introduce privatization. He did. Privatize everything and effectively make Russia into an extension of Thatcher-Reagan. And he was begging the Americans to let him do it. The Americans said, no, we need an enemy. So they sent the IMF in, and the IMF was sent in there with one currently friend of mine, a gentleman whom you may have heard of, Jeff Sachs. Have you followed his brilliant videos and interventions on Palestine and the war in Ukraine? That's now. It's like the New Testament and the Old Testament. The Old Testament, Jeff Sachs was a man of the United States and the IMF, and they crushed the Russian economy on purpose. And how did they do it? In the usual way of imposing incredibly harsh austerity on purpose. They demanded unpayable debts to be repaid. They put up taxes, and the result was a very interesting statistic. Many of you may know it. Life expectancy of Russian men, which was in 1991 78 years of age, which is comparable to the West, it fell down to 56. That doesn't happen even during a very severe war. So Russia was crushed by the United States, by the IMF, by the West. The result was a new authoritarian bloke, quasi-fascist, called Vladimir Putin. So you have NATO creating the United States creating the circumstances for the insecurity amongst us here in Europe, so that we feel that we need NATO. And I always suspected that. But in 2011, I moved from Greece to the United States. And I went to the great state of Texas, where I lived and worked in Austin at the University of Texas. And I was very privileged back then. The best part of my academic career, because it was a very wealthy department, the Lyndon Johnson School of Public Affairs. Graduate students, imagine, I had only 50 students, not me. The whole school had 50 students. And no chores whatsoever. It was just fantastic academic life for me. And our students were all trained to be diplomats, NGO people, USAID, United Nations, or CIA. And the dean of my school was a former general of the American Army, who was actually the chief of staff of NATO before he got this position. After he retired, he got this position of being dean in my school. His name was Bob, very nice guy. He was appointed by George W. Bush, so not some commie, right? And I remember having dinner with Bob and other people. And this is 2011. I said, Bob, having been the chief of staff of NATO in Brussels, why do we need NATO? He said, well, you don't need it, we do. I said, in this very convivial Texan straightforwardness, right? And he said, so why do you need? Okay, I agree, we don't need it and you do, but why do you need it? He said, for 3 reasons, Yanis. I said, what? To keep the Germans down, number 1, to keep the Russians out, and to keep ourselves in. That's why we need to get out of NATO. Because of what the former chief of staff, former general of the US Army told me. And which is evident. But how do we get there? There are necessary conditions that are not sufficient, and there are necessary conditions which can be made sufficient. A necessary condition is activism, is what we do. But it is not sufficient. Because you cannot allow these people in The Hague, in Brussels, in Washington, in London, in Dublin, to run around making decisions on our behalf without simply doing activism outside the gates. Now, there is no doubt that the transition from a movement to an electoral vehicle, call it a party, whatever, coalition that runs in elections, is a difficult one. It is one fraught with danger. Because the moment good people, I mentioned Costa before, the moment good people approach the corridors of power, they have a tendency to morph into bad people. That's why whatever we create in the form of a political party or an electoral vehicle has to be genuinely democratic, and there must be checks and balances. Anyone who wants to be a member of parliament, a government minister or a prime minister should be ruled out immediately. Immediately. You must only be allowed to do it if you consider it to be a chore. Only if you consider it to be a chore. Now this is easier said than done, but you see, there is no alternative than taking that step. And this is how I stop. When we created DiEM25, I just come out of government, and I have to tell you that the moment I resigned from the ministry, that was, in a way, one of the happiest moments of my life, because I no longer had to be a minister. It was awful being in those meetings and, having people lick my boots just because I was a stupid minister. It really distorts the morality of people to be next to somebody who's minister. I can assure you that. It is terrible. At the same time, I was extremely depressed because we suffered a major the movement suffered a major political defeat. So when we started DiEM25, and we had the press conference in Berlin and so on, we were asked, is this a party? And we said, no, it's a movement. It's a movement that tries to bring together many movements along the lines of activism. You don't need me to explain it. And what we did for 2 years was to bring together parties like Podemos in Spain, Die Linke in Germany, various organizations here in Holland, the Communist Party of France, La France Insoumise, Mélenchon's party. We brought everybody, Jeremy, everyone together to come up with a plan, to have an answer to the question, okay, if you don't like how Europe is being run, how would you run it? And that plan took had a name in the end, the Green New Deal for Europe, with which we were hoping that all these parties, including the Greens, would run in the European Parliament elections of 2019. And we had 1,000 experts from these different groups contributing to our program. It was a very hopeful period, until 7 months before the elections. We realized, that none of these parties will run with this thing that we created together. Not because they disagreed with us, but because within their parties, there were disagreements and they couldn't all coalesce around the thing that they contributed to. So in the end, in order to avert severe depression in our own hearts, I mean, we had created a nice document, 150 pages or so, a genuine answer to the question of what should happen in 2019 across Europe, in terms of investment, in terms of public goods, in terms of socializing money, of ending the monopoly that the central bank has over the bankers and the bankers over the central bank, green investment, that's a green part of the Green New Deal. So it was actually a great document. But if nobody was prepared to run in the elections with it, it would end up being on a shelf, on a bookshelf, as if we were a think tank, totally ignored by the world. So we decided to run. And that's when we created Mera, which is a Greek word for DiEM, for day. Right? And we ran in Greece, we ran in Germany, we ran in Portugal with some of our comrades there, in Spain. In the end, we ended up gathering something like 1.5 million votes across Europe, which is not a lot, but we had a budget of 60,000 euros across Europe. I mean, in municipal elections, the budget is greater than that. And we have not succeeded, but it doesn't matter. Simply by running in elections, we're running now in the elections in the Federal Republic of Germany. Okay, there's no chance we'll be elected. No chance, zero chance. But it doesn't matter. Running in these elections gives us the opportunity, when everybody's talking about politics during the election campaign, to go out there and leaflet and talk to people and to explain to them why you want their vote and make it known that there is an alternative. So this is far away from succeeding, but everything is far away from succeeding. What matters is taking the right step today along the same direction. Because Europe is incapable of being lucky. There is no way that there can be a helpful wind blowing into your sails if you're going in the wrong direction.
Thank you so much, Yanis, for that. Yes, I remember those meetings very well, all across Europe, very arduous meetings, coming up together with the Green New Deal for Europe and deciding on, all the details. That was quite intense. Regarding Germany, indeed, I think it's on the 23rd of February, if I'm not mistaken, our German party, Meta25, is running in 3 states, North Rhine-Westphalia, Bremen and Berlin. And whilst our chances are slim, like Yanis mentioned, there is a little bit of hope there that things can be different. And what I know about the Netherlands, I mean, I know quite a few things about this country, but one of them is that the threshold here is quite low. Lucille, you want to talk about that?
Thank you. Yes, so I personally, I've only been in the Netherlands for 3 years, and things have escalated so rapidly in 3 years. I mean, think about your life in 2021, think of your life in 2022, and now think of your life in 2025. There has been a massive shift in just where people are in their minds, the kind of narratives we are getting thrown in our faces. So in my opinion, humble opinion, I come from South Africa, by the way. Let me give some context. So I come from South Africa, and I was sharing with Brid earlier on, I was born in 1976, which is the year that the revolution truly began. And it began because in 1976 in South Africa, the then apartheid government was forcing students to be taught in the language of the oppressor, which is Afrikaans. And the students obviously protested against it, because how can you receive instruction in a language that you do not understand, right? Nelson Mandela spoke about that later on in his life when he said, if you want to communicate with something and get something into their head, you speak in your language, but if you want to get it into their heart, you speak in their language. And so students began to protest, and the police murdered 200 students that were protesting. And that is the true birth of the revolution, because previous to that, there were a lot of very educated people. I would say the left was all the educated university graduates. And what started to happen is the people began to go underground. Students left school to become part of the revolution. That is how we ended up with the Jacob Zuma. He was 14 years old, I think, when he joined the revolution. They all left school and they went underground. And what I'm trying to say is that when you see the crushing power of the oppressor being released in every single sphere of society, it's a moment of trying to get awake. You need to be more awake now than you've ever been in your entire life. This is the moment. And I was thinking about something that someone said to me earlier on when I was listening to Brid standing on that side, and I want to share it with you. If not now, when? If not you, who? The only way we can begin to shift things out of the hands of the 1%, and let me tell you, they're not just the oligarchy. They are present in positions of power and authority. They may not have money. We have a very famous one here who is now in NATO, may not be exceptionally wealthy, but a person of extreme power and influence. This also constitutes the 1%. How do you and I, the ordinary people, take on this bully, this giant that has been shoving us further and further down that sinkhole? If you speak to most people, they're on the precariat. They're one paycheck away from being homeless. If right now your landlord or whatever the housing system that keeps your house has to fail, how close are you to being homeless? This is an important question for us. Most of us don't have tens of thousands in the bank account that can save us in time of crisis. And this is not just our position, this is the position of millions of people across Europe. They're all going through the similar kind of austerity that we are all facing. Whilst somebody mentioned earlier on that the right is beginning to pretend like they care about good governance. But if you truly just lift up the carpet, you will see all the corruption and filth that's hidden there. They've been doing it for years and years and years, and we have been their victims. So how do you wake up from the state of victimhood? You have to do it. Unfortunately, right now, the only power we have is parliamentary power. Because we can, you know that I'm on the streets, right? We're on the streets. We have activity going on all the time. We are activists. We are speaking truth to power. We are raising our voices, raising our flags. Thousands of us, we march in the streets. We are thousands, we are millions. We are all Palestinians. We're dealing with the struggle that people across other lands are experiencing. But it can't only stay in a place of activism. That is, I would say, sadly, a bit impotent in dealing with the struggles and with the powers that be. We need to play them at their own game. And how we do that is by choosing good people. I love what Yanis said. People that don't desire this position are the best people. We need people who actually care about society to be in positions of leadership. And how do they get there? Through us. So we need to unite in the fight. Whatever organization you belong to, we need to come together and say, what is the solution about how we're going to move from point A to point B? And you mentioned that it's much easier here in the Netherlands. I think it's like 5,000 signatures to start something in your gemeente, right? And I want to say we have started a working group here in the Netherlands. We are planning to launch Mira25 at some point in the year. And we have a working group. Friso, can you just wave your hand? Friso? Okay. If you are interested in becoming part of this working group, let's talk. Because it's ordinary people in South Africa that shifted the power out of the hands of the few into the hands of the many. It was school children. It was people, housemaids, people that worked as domestic workers. It was the men that cleaned people's gardens. They shifted the power. You and I are not powerless. We are not powerless. They want us to think that we are. but we are not. We have power in the fact that we can change what is happening at those government levels. They talk the talk, but they don't walk the walk. And I said to someone the other day, I have zero respect for people that only talk but don't do the work. So I'm talking to us today. If we're willing to do the work, let's talk and let's shift things out of the hands of the few into the hands of the many.
Maybe I come more with the tradition of building the movement rather than building the party. But that's not to say that the party doesn't have to be built. I think especially at this time, and maybe I sort of overstep myself if I have some comments about the Dutch movement. As we are speaking, I am thinking of two, what to me are now, well, maybe there are three major movements of people. One is what we've seen in Gaza over, I think the most significant thing in January in relation to Palestine is, my God, those people who've taken to the road to walk back through Gaza to their homes. I mean, I think we cannot fully draw the lessons from that, because what you'll also notice, those people, whether they were walking or in donkey cars or in motor cars, were organized. They were organized. This was not a free-for-all, jump and get back and take your place. I really do think we have immense lessons to draw from that. And of course it has historical resonance. We think of the Great March on China. We think of the great march of people who lined up to vote in South Africa. But also, I am thinking, one of my first experiences here in the Netherlands was the mobilization in Amsterdam on the Pershing missiles. Everyone who was able to walk and those who weren't able to walk, kids in prams, I mean, Amsterdam was occupied on that day against the Pershing missiles. And so was Bonn about a month later, also when Reagan came there. So it's not like people know what to do with it. But maybe the other image that's for me in relation to the movement is we should have a much deeper discussion about the why. Why have we come to this point? But maybe we've grown too fond of our club mentality when it comes to movement. We have our favorite issues. In a way, globalization gave us permission to be passionate about the environment, but forget capitalism. Don't mention it. It gave us, we got false permissions. We can be organized on the rights of animals, but we cannot organize on the rights of migrants. Forget it. Migrants and refugees. That's the other major movement in the world that we have to take into account. And I think it's also very relevant here in the Netherlands and in Amsterdam. And I'm so delighted that Lucille is taking her place and her power in this effort to build DiEM. But I think, it tells its own story. For the years I've been working here, and there are some people in the room also, we have worked, in the forefront, not just of migrant and refugee rights, but of workers' rights, have been the Moroccan workers, the Turkish workers. They are extremely occupied at the moment about what's going on in the Netherlands. They are organizing also their gatherings. They are trying to see what are the connections with the home front, where the fight has to go on as well, and where North Africa can refuse simply to be the mercenaries of Europe at this point in time when it comes to migrants and refugees. So I think, what I'm kind of calling out is maybe there's and it shouldn't be to delay us, because I think if the marching in Gaza has taught us anything, it's the absolute urgency. At the same time, we need to be reflective. We need to know and ask ourselves why we are comfortable in our struggles in small groups. And I mean, I do think this is really a problem.
Yes.
Because we should make 1,000 flowers bloom, of course, but we should maybe take the lesson of the Zapatistas and build movements that have multiple movements inside. I think this is our biggest chance at the moment, to find the way to make. These convergences are not easy. They'll be full of tension, they'll be full of battles, they'll be full of discomfort. You know, this is the great word at the moment in 21st century Europe. You know, am I safe? Am I comfortable?
Yeah.
No, we will not make the politics of the future by being comfortable. So what am I saying? What am I trying to say? Well, one thing I will say, I'll go back to Yanis's first words this morning about being fixated on Palestine. One thing I will say about the Irish body politic at the moment, of course, we don't forget that we had our Bloody Sunday. We had the anniversary just a few days ago when the people who walked for civil rights in Northern Ireland were, just gone down by the SAS. And has anybody ever been held accountable? Not at all. Forget about accountability. No, but I think the question of, we have a fixation about Palestine, and I think it's a very healthy fixation. Many fixations we want to, we maybe should get rid of. But the fixation on Palestine is so important, also for the reasons that Yanis said, that it teaches us about ourselves. Whatever it teaches us about the Palestinians, it teaches us about ourselves. It teaches about, the machinery, the infrastructure, the system, the multilateral system that we are part of, and there are some important things about it, but that system has served really Europe and US's interests economically and otherwise. And I think these are the kind of, deep dive, deep seek discussion that we really need to have. I mean, this is the other thing. Some language we're not allowed to use. We're not allowed to use. The C words are particularly bad. Maybe the P words are very bad, but the C words, communism, there's another one. Capitalism, of course, and Chinese. Oh my God, don't go there. Don't go there. Nothing to be learned there. I mean, Europe as a continent, as an entity, declared China as a strategic enemy. I mean, so when we dealt with the Russians, let's get on to the Chinese. I mean, the kind of unsupported, unintelligent comments that we are swallowing as the narrative of the dominant, we really have to kind of go back, really take a deep dive, a deep seek, I think, and try to make, like, I loved your question, actually, Yanis, about it's not enough to keep Ireland out of NATO. I agree completely. But by posing the question, how would a universal declaration for the rights of all peoples in the Netherlands, how would that look if we had a National Assembly or some such initiative to write a new declaration for the people of the Netherlands, by the people of the Netherlands, the transnational people of the Netherlands, not simply the white supremacist people of the Netherlands. So, yeah, that's it.
We'll move on to, we have a bit of time for questions, some questions, right? Yeah, let's do that before we close. Let's go. I didn't see you put a, let's go here to the front, this lady on the front here. Miko, anybody got a microphone? I'll have to use this one. Miko, could you please help me out? Thank you. Drop right at the front there.
Yeah, she can go first. Okay.
Not me, sure. Hi. Okay, thank you for everything. This is a question mostly to Yanis and Brid. I read your books, Yanis, the Techno-Feudalism and Another Now, thank you. And since I work in tech, I had this burning question ever since. So I work for one of these companies that are, like based in the US, completely listed. Many of them are in Ireland as well. And as a tech worker, my question is, what is your advice to us? Like, should we stay in these companies and stand our ground there in this extremely toxic environments where all the leadership has all the, that bunch of capitalists, neoliberalists, and these guys, and all of our workers, they don't see themselves as workers. They are like a very full of hubris and so on, most of them. So should we do our work there and stand our ground there in this environment? Should we move out and then create alternatives with our skills, or should we just do a third thing, like do both, or grow potatoes instead?
Thanks so much. Let's gather a few more, and then we can do it all at the same time. The lady over there, and then the gentleman over here. So yeah.
Hello, my name is Juliette. I'm from People's Health Movement, and we also have a Dutch circle. And I'm a bit struggling with the tensions between organizing locally and how to make a fist to like the bigger movement. So, for example, I believe that when we build locally, we can build that world that's worth fighting for. I come from the poorest city in the Netherlands, which is Rotterdam, where in some areas 13% of the people only vote. So there's no trust in local politics. And we are creating a movement there built of many people that are already working on a local level, that have been in the neighborhoods, and that are doing what's needed for the people and with the people, for example, in healthcare, as we do. And at the same time, our enemies, they are working on a global scale. They're working together, they're building coalitions. And so I was wondering, as someone who organizes locally, how do we connect to that bigger story? But also, as you are faces also of the global, because you reach many people, how do you engage that locality, and what do you do within your own locality? And for DiEM25, what do you do on the local scale within the cities? You're not, for example, in the movements of Rotterdam. So is that one of your intention to build there where there is already being built? Because many things are happening on the bad but also on the good side in the Netherlands. And I think it's crucial to interweave, because otherwise we're going to win.
Thanks so much. And then the last question just here, and then if we have time after, we'll do more. But the gentleman over here on this side. Yeah. Thank you.
We're running out of time.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks a lot. It's a very nice discussion today, and a lot of food for thought. I'm a bit skeptic about the following. Like, there are some facts. First of all, the right, as we said, is rising. Secondly, I feel that the message from our side doesn't reach a broad audience. Something's not going well with this. Activism of movements are super useful and important, but I'm not sure if they reach the people, the message reaches the people who do not look at here. I'm not sure, like, I'm curious, Yanis said before that, yeah, it doesn't matter if Mera succeeds in Germany. I don't know if I understood correctly the statement, but I think it matters, because if it succeeds, it means that the message reached a broader audience. And this is why I'm a bit skeptical. What is the lesson learned so far?
Increasingly, tech workers, you have your own experiences, but from tech workers I know, especially in Silicon Valley, the veneer of their invulnerability to the boss's brutality has gone. Something else.
That's a confirmation. Yeah.
So once upon a time, for instance, if you worked for Google at the campus in San Francisco, you felt you were in a kind of Disneyland. Today it feels more like a sweatshop. So things are getting worse. But let me come straight to your question, what should you do? I can't possibly give personal advice, because this is the whole point about politics. We're talking about collectivities, we are talking about movement choices, not individual choices. But I will nevertheless try to not avoid your question by saying that the movement will need techies. We are going to certainly, most certainly, and because you read my another now, I think that in the same way we need engineers, old-fashioned mechanical engineers and chemical engineers. We need coders, we need technologists, we need people who know the algos, who know how to build algos, because when we take them over, somebody needs to run them. And the whole point is not to be Luddites in the vulgar term, of the sense of the term, because the original Luddites were very misunderstood, and they were wonderful activists, and they didn't work against the machines, they worked against the owners of the machines. The objective must be to take over, to socialize the means of communication, not just for production and distribution, and we need you. So if you feel that you can maintain your sanity and your integrity while staying within, learning, sharing what you learn with us, and being ready to help us create our own apps, the apps of the movement, the apps of civil society, then stay. Okay, on the question of local versus global organization, well, it's not a dilemma. You have to work, I'm not going to say anything you don't know. We need to work at both levels. So yes, it is true that there are disenfranchised communities who don't give a damn about the discussion about DeepSeek, about the BRICS, about the European Central Bank. They will only be motivated by things that concern their own sports club, their own school, their own hospital, their access to healthcare and so on. And that's what we need to provide for them, a voice regarding those things. But at the same time, we can't ignore the fact that there's something called the European Central Bank, which prints trillions for the ultra-rich. And in so doing, it depresses the rest of society. We need to take over the ECB, but that requires a movement that is pan-European. And those two movements go hand in hand. You have to work hard to ensure that the people in the local community who are apolitical or depoliticized because they've been disenfranchised because they have no access to a doctor, they understand that the reason why they don't have an access to a doctor has much to do with the way the European Central Bank operates. And finally, no, I never said that it doesn't matter if we don't do well in elections, otherwise, why are we doing it? Of course. But what I'm saying is that even if you were to, let's say that you had a crystal ball and you were to derive from it a safe prediction that we would fail, that's no reason for not to do it. That's the point I was making. As for the capacity of the movement, the party, to reach a broad audience. Yeah, look, we are facing a megalith of concentrated discursive power in the hands of a tiny band of people who own the media, who will make sure they will, work tirelessly day and night to make sure that our message doesn't come across. So that. So it's not exactly failure, it's a design feature of the system. That doesn't mean that we can't and we shouldn't try to pierce through that. But this is not entirely up to us. We have social media, we have one way, this way, that way of doing it. But from my experience, it is, I often use the metaphor of surfing. Once upon a time I used to surf in Australia. The surfer cannot create the wave. But the surfer has an obligation to be ready for catching the wave when it comes. So in 2015, for instance, our little party, we were around 3-4% free yokes. 3-4%. Then the crisis hit. And the movements started, the solidarity movements started working very, very hard and very successfully across Greece. And they created the wave, the crisis and the movement. And then we rode it. And we went from 3% to 40% in a few years. So this is what we should be doing. And we should not despair that the wave isn't here. Don't worry about that. That's what I meant. Prepare to catch it.
Thank you so much.
There's not really much to add in relation to addressing the questions beyond what Yanis has said, but on your question in particular, earlier this morning, one or two people, came up to have a chat about what did I mean by the political imaginary, because I think in a way, we're in a new era about where the radical, progressive, transformative movements are going to come from. Or maybe it was always there, but I think, I mean, reading the signs of the times and reading where the political agency is going to come from. I think, you know, Lucille gave us a very good example. The students in Soweto. This is a catalyst. I think in our case in Europe, we have to search and look. I think it's going to be disruptive. We will have to disrupt where we're okay, and maybe we are talking a lot to the converted. I mean, even this room this morning, so full of good vibes and searches for the future, is really still a bubble. We all agree with that. And what Yanis is saying, I think it's important. I mean, you know, a lot of the future is going to be dominated by, I don't know, determined by the tech and the tech workers and those mediums of communication. But I think, and I will stand to be corrected, I do think we will still have to look people in the eye. We will have to go to the sites of resistance. Where are they happening in the Netherlands? I think we can all find where the sites of resistance are. Certainly in our experience of building a multi-sectoral movement and a multi-social movement on the question of corporations, it was the affected communities that are affected, whether they are in the global south or in the global north. This is the catalyst. And I think we have to be able to find those sites of resistance. And maybe in relation to Europe, I think one of the imaginary things we may have to think about. I mean, I had my vision of Amsterdam and the Pershing missiles, or Bonn in the time of Reagan, or indeed London and Britain in the time of Gaza. The mobilizations were just so fantastic. But I think there are other movements happening. And one of the ones that will be coming up in this year is the Caravan for the Rights of Migrants and Refugees, run by the migrants and refugees themselves. And I think this is one of the key areas of struggle that we in Europe have to look very closely at, and what's happening there in terms of political agency, in terms of north-south understanding, in terms of how this could be part of the Europe that we want. So I think we have to sharpen where we're looking for this kind of catalyst.
Thank you so much, Brid. Thank you so much for that. Absolutely.
It is really true. We have to continuously build the movement, because within or from the movement, we gain the strength as a springboard to move to the next level, which is the level of governance. And the reason why I'm part of DiEM25 is because we are doing that. We have the movement, which is DiEM25, and it never ever stops standing in the streets and protesting and raising its voice. But then we also have the electoral wing, and that deals with implementing these ideas. And coming from the global south myself, I really love the idea that we are not just tackling local issues or having our blinkers on, like they say. You know, you're not like a racehorse in a race that you're only looking at this one little lane, but it's a multi-dimensional take on politics. If we don't take care of the most vulnerable amongst us, then what we are doing is of absolutely zero value for the world. Because that's where political reach needs to go. It needs to reach to the most vulnerable person. It needs to reach the person here who perhaps doesn't have arms, or perhaps doesn't have legs, or perhaps cannot hear or see, that is completely dependent on other human beings to keep them sustained and alive. Palestine is dependent on us because they have absolutely zero to rest on. That's why we have to become, what was the word they used? Fixated. Because if you're not fixated on the most vulnerable, then what are you busy doing? One day we'll all not be here anymore. Me personally, I do not have any children. I have one stepson, but he was not born from my womb. And I think about this all the time. What will be the thing I leave behind? It is whether or not I stood up in a time of great adversity and spoke up for the most vulnerable and spoke up for those that are politically and economically being crushed by a diabolical system that they were, even before they were born, they were already cursed to suffer under the heaviness of whatever that weight is. Before a child's first cry comes out in Gaza, it is already named 1 million names. It is born under this wave of oppression. And that's why it's important for us to continuously do the work. But important also for us to hold those accountable that have brought us here in the first place. And the only way we can do that is take up the spaces which they hold right now. And that's how you organize for power to bring down the 1%. We unite in the fight. Who lot is dit? Who lot is dit? Who lot is dit? Who lot is dit? In Dutch, what's the time or how late is it? Solidariteit. Tate in Dutch is time. So it's time for solidarity. I thank you.
Thank you so much for that. Thank you.
I think Davide will have the last word here. But there's just two things I just wanted to say, two sentences. One is, if you want to know the depth of the complicity of Europe in the current genocide, you should turn to TNI. We have a very good report called Partners in Crime. And you'll find it all there. It's really well worth a read, and you can add your own chapter as well. And the second thing I did want to say was, I don't know, do we have singers here? Do people know the song We Teach Life, sir? No, this is the great Palestinian singer, and this wonderful song. I'll just quote a line of it. It would be great if we were able to finish with it, but I mean, it's like the kind of, the way we have to invent a new vocabulary. I think somebody said earlier, we're not speaking actually, well, Mandela, we're not speaking the language of the people and their daily experience. Well, this song is really speaking that language, and it's called, she's imagining being interviewed by the media and all the, having the right language, having the best English or the best Dutch, no? But what the last line of it is amazing, because when you're interviewed like this, you're not supposed to use the word apartheid, bad word, occupation, or worse word, oh my God, genocide, my goodness, no, you can't mention those words. But what she says is, we Palestinians wake up every morning to teach the rest of the world life. We teach life, sir or madam. We teach life. And I think this is the kind of language that everyone understands what that's about. No? Anyway, that's it.
Thank you so much. That's fantastic. Well, on that note, I don't know if I'm not going to try and even beat that, because that's already a perfect ending. All I'm going to say is, thank you for being here. Thank you for being part of this event. Sign up on of course, at the entrance there. Go there and sign up. Thank you for coming. It was only 3 days that we had to organize this event, so it's a magnificent turnout. We're very happy to have you here, and we hope that you join us soon.